Rhonda and Heather, thank you for joining us today. You did the Hearts and Hands conference, the Civility Matters, a coffee break chat. And what we wanted to offer people is for you to be able to answer some of their questions. And we have some great questions that were sent to us. So we appreciate you taking the time. And hopefully this will be very valuable for people.
Absolutely.
And so the first question we have is sort of a broad one in the sense of why does workplace civility matter?
Well, I think, Ken, if I'll take the first stab at this, and I think, we all deserve to work in environments where people treat each other with respect and consideration, where conflict is handled appropriately between individuals, and everyone is treated fairly. And I think the work that healthcare aides do is tough enough, right? It's physically and mentally demanding at the best of times, and even more so in these COVID times. And so I think, healthcare aides need to know that they can come to work to be supported by their colleagues, where their colleagues lift them up as opposed to pulling them down. And, an essential part of working in healthcare is working as part of a team. And, to have a healthy, functioning team, you need a civil workplace. And I think when you don't have a civil environment, I think that the impacts can be incredibly far-reaching.
That's great. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah. What you might find if it isn't civil is that rules and norms can fall by the wayside, and there can be kind of a slow slide into behaviors that are not respectful, not kind. And a paper that I was reading talked about moral disengagement. And it talked about if you sort of exist in the frogs in the pot that's boiling away, and you may be working in this environment. And as it goes on, you may find your own sort of responses to things sliding so that you are actually participating perhaps in behaviors that you normally wouldn't, and that you may not even realize that that's harmful. It just kind of blinds you to what's going on. So it's something to really keep in check. There's really subtle systemic pressures as well. So if you work in a workplace that is uncivil, you may find, sort of going along that line of that moral disengagement, you may not be following the rules that you normally would. So for instance, you may know this resident is a 2-person transfer, but it's kind of like everybody just does that person on their own because you can't find another person. It's quicker to do it yourself. So you slide into that as well. And those things can cause harm to yourself and to the resident, of course.
So really what you're saying is it's about me feeling good at work and feeling good with my colleagues, but there's also a health and safety aspect that's happening here.
Yes, absolutely. And if you think about civility, it's civics, it's about our kind of responsibility as citizens. And at work, we're kind of citizens of the workplace. So how are we showing up? What are our behaviors at work? Are we modeling a respectful behavior? Are we showing kindness? Those kinds of things, just as we would in, how we would treat others in a store, for instance, in our families or with friends, strangers. How are we treating other people?
I like that. That's great. That's wonderful. Let's go to our next question, which I think is a really important one, because we think about what can I do as an individual, but what can management do to best support a civil environment?
Yeah, we had a lot of talk about this, Heather and myself, and we came up, I think, with some really great ideas. And so, Heather, go ahead. I cut you off.
That's okay. I was going to say, one of the things that our research showed was that many of these acts of incivility are very subtle, right? They kind of fly under the radar. And as a manager, if you are situated perhaps more in your office, there's a million fires that you need to deal with during your day. But if you don't have that opportunity to get out on the unit, and you don't have that presence on the unit, you don't necessarily pick up on those subtle things that are going on between your staff, those currents that are occurring. And then, if you're not aware of that, it takes a big blow up, right? Or the tensions that build. And the first you hear of that is the blow up that has now landed individuals in your office. And you're having to deal with the outfall from that. Whereas just that importance of being visible on the unit and really, having your finger on the pulse of the unit and what's going on, I think helps sort of divert some of those issues from occurring.
Mm-hmm. A few years ago, Heather and I worked in the same workplace, and we had several managers, but one that we were reminiscing about yesterday, just the best manager that we ever had. And this was a woman who would come to the unit, and she would say to you, "What can I do for you today?" And so, it would be grandiose. I remember once we said, "We need a brand new nursing station." So, "I'm not sure I can do that for you today." But the point was that she knew that she needed to check in with people in a very, very authentic way. She could tell you, "You know what, I can't do that." Or, "Yeah, okay, let me work on that." And she always told us it's the job of the manager to do that work. And nursing is the world that I come from, and in nursing research, Jerry Farrell from Australia talked about managers are the culture carriers of the organization. And I know that places them in a place where they're already stressed with, pressures from above and pressures from below. But it really is incumbent, I think, on the leaders of an organization to ensure that the culture is civil. We had some other really great ideas about how to.
Yeah, and maybe building on that, Rhonda, I think the importance of thinking about teamwork, and that we sometimes think we have some magical thinking about teamwork, right? That if we just do an in-service on teamwork and we tell people that they just, you don't need to like each other, but you need to get along, and we just sort of leave it at that, that's not going to be sufficient to build that cohesive team that you need on your unit to really, promote good quality of work life for staff, which of course in turn is going to impact the quality of life for the residents. And I think about, the efforts that we devote in business, for example, to teamwork, and the seminars and the conscious effort that is made to get teams functioning well, because for them, if teams don't function well, the bottom line is the almighty dollar, right? And it digs into their profit line. But for us in healthcare, our bottom line, those are the folks for whom we provide care. Mm-hmm. And certainly, I would argue more so than in any kind of business, in healthcare, we really need to make sure that our teamwork is top notch, and that takes a concerted effort on everyone's behalf. It's not just an in-service once a year on how to become a better team.
That's great. That's great. And so the takeaway I think there is for managers to be present and to be visible, and that will help the preventing some of these issues before they get large.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Rhonda, before we move on, did you just want to speak to the importance of the sort of the guarding minds at work and the role of occupational health and safety in terms of management?
Yeah, because a lot of concerns that come forward in our workplaces in healthcare have to do with safety. And we're talking so much more these days, not just about physical safety, but psychological health and safety. And there's a real kind of onus on employers to ensure that their employees have a psychologically safe workplace as well. And guarding minds at work is a reliable tool that employers can use to give to their staff a survey about how they're doing. It is a free tool, and it's endorsed by the Canadian Mental Health Association. And I would encourage managers to look into that as well. If I might just add, there was a couple of other really practical things that we thought that managers could do. Managers are often kind of the first place someone will come if they've got a complaint about someone else. And oftentimes it can become a kind of a triangulation situation. And so what we would really encourage managers is to deal with things at the dot, as they say, like when they first come up. So facilitate conversations between folks that seem to be having difficulty with each other, so that it doesn't escalate and then expand to other people. And ask people what they need to do their work, ensure that they've got enough resources. And going back to kind of health and safety, do they have the PPE that they need just now during COVID? And encourage fun. And you know what, as a manager, if you ensure that your staff are taking their breaks, right? It's a physically exhausting job. So checking in, making sure that people are taking care of themselves at work as well, I think would be important.
That's fantastic. You know, the next question I think is an important one, and I think many of us have felt this in our careers at different times, and it depends on the organizational culture. But what if staff are scared to intervene or say anything? And if that happens, what should they do?
Yeah, this was a tougher one. It gave us pause for thought. And Heather, do you want to start with this?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I think the importance of, taking a colleague with you, if you're going to speak to someone about it, right? Sort of there's, you do have to report it. I think one of the things that got me into this research in the first place was when I happened to witness abuse, and there were two carrieds in the room, and the first carried was a bit of a bully, quite uncivil to her colleagues at times. And the second carried in the room didn't step forwards to actually report what she had witnessed. And it, perhaps wasn't dealt with as well as it could be. But when I spoke with her, the fear of repercussion from her colleague, like if she was the one to step forwards and say something, she was convinced that this individual had a lot of power, informal power in their care home, and could make her life very difficult. So really thinking about how we support individuals to come forwards. The answer in this case, that individual actually was suspended for not coming forwards, which probably wasn't the best way to actually address what was going on that unit in terms of the relationships between staff. So I think finding a colleague who can go with you and just give you that support. It's a very scary thing to go forwards and to have that fear of repercussion. But at the same time, the folks for whom we provide care, they're vulnerable, and their care becomes impacted when incivility builds and builds on a unit, and we do need to step forwards and say something. Rhonda?
I always encourage people to write down the situation, write it down, and then have a look at it and kind of remove the emotional pieces out of it, and stick to the facts. What happened? Who said what? How did that make you feel? And put it in the form of almost an impact statement, and take that written statement with you when you go forward and report what's happened. Because if it becomes emotional for you, the support person that you've taken with you can finish reading your statement. And it's almost like a victim impact statement. It has that ability. And in one case, the perpetrator, they were made safe as well. And so there's a manager in HR, and I was there as a union representative. And we want to make it safe for that person, because we're talking about behaviors. And the victim impact statement was read out to them. And so they could hear it through the words of the person. And sometimes people don't know the impact that they've had on other people. And just going back to, I recognize that people are scared, just like Heather said, there's fear of retaliation, or I may never get a permanent job here. So it is a really tough thing to do. But what has happened for far too long is that people haven't come forward to speak up. And then these things perpetuate and get worse. So it's really gathering support around you and keeping to the facts, and how it's impacted you, and take it forward. And sometimes you may have to go up higher in the organization if you don't feel like you're getting a response to your concerns.
And I think just to build on that, Rhonda, if we go back to what we were talking about on the previous slide and about the role of management, I think sometimes staff might be apprehensive to come forwards because management, or their feeling is that management hasn't acted in the first place, right? Or that they've gone forwards with these concerns. And I think that's why, as Rhonda said, it's so important as managers to deal with things at the dot, so that you don't have this perpetuation of these uncivil behaviors.
Mm-hmm. And they tell you that if you're making a complaint as a customer, you're going to a store, you're unhappy with something, that you always need to ask for what you want. You tell them what the problem is and then say what you want. And I would encourage people to be thinking about that when they do go forward with their concern. And mostly what people tell me is, I don't want this to happen again. I don't want this to happen to anybody else, but I certainly don't want it to happen to me. And that I'm putting that ball in your court, manager or supervisor, to ensure that that doesn't happen again. And then you may have to leave it there and let them do their work.
That's great. I think there's some really good tips for people there. So what if the bullying or inappropriate behavior is from residents, clients, and patients? It's a little bit different here. Should that be addressed differently? And if so, how? So often we think about incivility and it's the workers. What happens when it's the people that we're caring for?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this still comes back to Canada. So, we were chatting about this and we were saying, well, not really, because in essence, what it comes down to is this culture that exists in a particular home. And is that a safe and respectful culture, for everyone who lives and works there? So in much the same way that bullying or that inappropriate behavior still needs to be reported, in many of the same ways that, Rhonda just alluded to with the previous slide. And I think perhaps it's important that staff model that tone of civility, even when faced with this behavior. And it's hard. And I'm certainly not saying that you need to accept that behavior, because nobody does. Nobody needs to work in an environment like that. But to try and you take the high road and continue to model that civility. And over time, perhaps that then starts to shift. Rhonda, anything to add?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about this could be something that, could come forward to your health and safety committee as well, to report it through the right channels at work. And I know this can be very difficult because clients come, residents come, and they're complex care, and a lot of times family don't maybe understand why something is being done a certain way, or that staff are following a care plan, and try to they just want the best for their family, but it can come out very inappropriately. And I would say that it requires so it isn't different, I think, Ken, from our previous slide. It does need to be addressed. It does need to be reported up, because it affects the whole culture of that work unit if those kinds of things persist.
I think that's great, and what it does is that it just shows us that it shouldn't be ignored, that we do need to address it, because it does impact the workplace, and it does impact how we feel at work. So I think that's some great tips there. Have you seen organizations change the environment from an uncivil workplace to a civil one? And if so, how long did it take? Is it gonna change tomorrow?
Well, I think we need to remember, Ken, that these situations don't necessarily, in the same way we can't solve it tomorrow, they didn't arise just from yesterday, right? That these are things that these uncivil behaviors that continue over time, if they continue unchecked, right, then you have that potential for quite a toxic work environment. And so it's taken a while to get to that point, and it's going to take a while to move beyond that point. For sure. Rhonda, I think you had some numbers around that.
Yeah. it can take up to 7 years to shift a culture. That's a really long time. And I know people are like, oh my goodness, I don't have 7 years left to work. I can't wait that long, right? And it doesn't mean that change can't happen incrementally, but I think that it requires effort, and it depends, I guess, how far down the dot you've gone. Because what can happen is if things are never dealt with, you have a train wreck. And I have worked where an organization was so broken that it had to go all the way up, through directors and to, the top of the health authority for change to happen. And the staff had been saying, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong for a long time. And good people leave their jobs. That's a result of an uncivil workplace, and we see that. So it can take some time, but not to lose hope, because what we want to do is the more we recognize something going on that isn't contributing to a safe and respectful culture in a workplace, the more we speak up, the easier it is, I think, for change to occur. And a speaker I heard once talked about, if you see something, say something. And we're very used to doing that in healthcare workplaces. And we talked about this in our little workshop. If you see a safety hazard, you speak up immediately, because you know that the JOSH committee will take care of it. But we don't as often speak up when we see things that are a little more under the surface to do with the culture in the workplace. And we have to change that mindset. We do have to speak up, and we do have to stand up. And what we know is that there's a vast amount of witnesses in a workplace. Very few people are perpetrators and people are targets, but there's a vast majority in the middle that are seeing things that are going on. And it's those folks that are able to be able to speak up and say, we have to change this. One of the ideas that we had maybe for managers, just going back to a few slides ago, is to, we have resident committees or I lost the word, Heather.
Councils.
Yeah. Councils, yes. And wondering about, maybe we need to have the creation of a culture council at work that is staff and management. So it's not safety, it's not taking the place of a JOSH committee, it's not taking the place of a union management meeting, but it is around the culture of the organization, and to kind of bridge that gap perhaps between management and staff, and to talk quite openly about the culture of our organization and what are some of the things that we need to do to improve it or to change it.
I think that's a great idea. I really like it. And like you say, it's different than some of the committees that are already established, but it's one that's really focused at what is the culture we have here and what is the culture that we want to have here. I think that's a great idea for organizations. And the other thing that I picked up is not to lose hope that these things take time to change and that everybody's impact counts. And I think sometimes we get discouraged because, like a lot of things in our society, whether it's climate change or these types of things, we sort of think, well, how can I play a role? It's just me as an individual. But I think what you're saying is, don't get discouraged, and everybody has an impact. Doesn't matter who you are, you play a role.
Yeah. And indeed, Ken. And I think, we can do small things as well. Some of the other things we can think about is creating a psychological safety huddle. So we come together at morning report or at shift change, and we typically launch into a conversation about somebody's bowel regime or, who's got an appointment. Whereas perhaps we just need to step back, and for those first few minutes, it's a check-in with your staff. So this is that real leadership role, I think, that the LPNs can take on, and do a really nice job of just checking in and saying, how's everyone doing today? And that's that opportunity to create that safe space where, someone can then say, you know what? I had a horrendous night. I've been up with my 6-year-old, they spiked a fever or they were throwing up, or I've got very little sleep. So I'm here physically today, but mentally I'm pretty worn down. So just to let you know where I am today. And that creates that opportunity for staff to then be like, well, you know what? if she leaves some dirty towels in a resident's room, it's not done on purpose. It's not done to create some, extra work for someone else. It's just the space that they're in today. So give them the grace and the compassion that they need, and step in and just pick up behind, because your turn will come next week. But it's about creating that space and that environment and building that trust and safe space for staff to really be authentic with one another.
And there's nothing more people oriented than working in a healthcare setting, right? You're working with people all day long, from your clients and your residents to working with your staff. It is, if there's one last thing that I could say for managers, it is to really recognize the people that work in your organization. They are an asset that you, and as we know these days with the shortages of staff, they cannot be taken for granted. And I attended a culture conference in San Francisco a couple of years ago, and there were all kinds of companies there, and they're talking about culture in their organization as being the number one issue. You can have a product and sell a product, but it is your people that keep folks coming back to your business. And in the healthcare business, it is about the staff that work for you and taking care of them and building that culture and really recognizing it. You take care of your people, and they will take care of the people that they take care of. And that doesn't, it's got a little bit odd, but many companies are creating culture officers. One great big company had chief heart officer, looking at how do we take care of our folks, our people. And I think that it really comes back to that just now. And we heard that from the folks that attended the conference this year, that they were hungry for ways to take care of themselves, because you can't take care of other people if your own battery's empty. And so it's really about, we're all in this together. How do we take care of one another? And yeah.
I just, we can't expect the residents to thrive if our staff don't, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you both. It's fantastic. I think it's valuable information. We appreciate your work on this because, as you say, civility matters, and so we appreciate your time on this. And I'm sure we'll have future conversations about this important topic.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.